Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my quick check-in before the Eagles-Lions game tomorrow afternoon. I'm just going to let you know sort of what I think, break it down, and then give you my prediction for what I think is going to happen in tomorrow's game. First of all, I want to talk about the matchup that intrigues me the most going into the game, and that's going to be Jim Schwartz versus Matthew Stafford. Obviously, Jim Schwartz was the head coach for the Lions for a number of years, so he's familiar with Matthew Stafford and some of his tendencies. As a defensive coordinator, I think he's really going to know sort of how to attack Stafford and maybe keep him off balance throughout the game. And I think that's going to be really important for our defense to make sure that Detroit's offense doesn't get on too much of a roll. And the reason I say that is they are clearly much more of a passing team than they are a running team. So the pass is much more important to them in terms of their offense and their offensive attack than the ground game is. And that's really evident as to where their offense stands in the rankings as it relates to the various phases of the game. They are 22nd in rushing offense, but they're 6th in passing offense. So they are much more effective moving the ball through the air and getting points that way. In terms of points, they're 13th in points per game. So if you're looking at that, this is an offense that can score the ball, can move the ball, but I think that because they are a little more reliant on the passing game, that is an area that Jim Schwartz can sort of focus on. And that's going to be real important then for us to continue to get a good pass rush with our four down linemen. That's been one thing that Schwartz has been really good about doing this year is he's not had to send a lot of blitzes. We've been able to get pressures on the quarterback with just our defensive linemen. And I think that's going to be important to do. And I think it's also going to be important to send the occasional blitz as well to keep Stafford sort of off balance. Because ultimately, if we don't get pressure on Stafford, I'm still leery of our corners. They haven't won me over completely. We've been doing pretty well this year in terms of stopping the passing game and not getting a lot scored on us. But I'm still a little leery of the cornerbacks. And as a result of that, I think getting pressure on Stafford is still really important. So then it becomes a question of what can we do with our offense against their defense, and can we score points against them? And looking at their defense, I think that answer is clearly yes. Overall defense in terms of yardage given up is 25th, and their passing and rushing breakdown there's no strong side or weak side. They're 21st in pass and 23rd in running defense. Ultimately, that leads to them being 20th in points allowed per game. So we'll be able to score points against this team. We should be able to move the ball against this team. But since they struggle in both areas, I think it's important for us to sort of make sure that we're keeping a balanced game still intact. Another interesting thing about their pass defense probably is actually even worse than the stats suggest. Think about it this way. Of the 4 games they've played so far, probably the best quarterback they've played against is Aaron Rodgers of the Packers. And he had only just over 200 yards passing against them. And that's because they got such a big lead in the first half that in the second half of that game, they were pretty much running the ball, and Aaron Rodgers wasn't expected to do a lot. So their yardage could be a lot worse in the passing game had the Packers continued to throw the ball. So I think this defense can be exploited, especially in the passing game, but that's only going to be really effective if they're worried about us running the ball too. Another interesting fact when you're looking at their passing game, and this is something that jumped out at me that I hadn't heard anywhere, but I think it really speaks a lot as to what potentially how good of a game Carson Wentz could have. They are dead last in opponents' quarterback ratings against them. So quarterbacks are having a very good day against their particular pass defense. So I really think that we can sort of sit back and take advantage of that and make sure that we're attacking through the air at the right time, still keeping the running game balanced, and I think Carson Wentz should be able to have another really stellar game. Now, all of this, of course, is predicated on protecting the ball. And one of the things that has been well documented over the first 3 weeks of the season is the fact that Carson Wentz still has not turned over the ball yet. In fact, the whole Eagles team in 3 games has not yet turned the ball over. So that's a stat that you're going to win football games if you're not turning the football over. So I think that that's important to continue to do. If we get turnovers from them, that's great. Our defense, I know, is really great at being aggressive and trying to create turnovers, and so they're good at that. But I think on our side of the field, it's even more important for us not to sort of give up the turnovers, because if we can move the ball against them and not turn the ball over, I don't see there's any way we end up losing this game. One other factor we really have to think about is there's a good portion of this team that was around for last year when the Eagles got shellacked by the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving. I counted there's roughly probably around 30 to 33 guys on the roster that are on the roster now that were also on the roster last Thanksgiving. So a lot of those guys are going to remember how they were embarrassed. I'm convinced a lot of that had to do with the fact the way the team was being coached. They were in probably one of the worst stretches of football that they were playing at that particular point was going into that Thanksgiving game. So it's for those reasons that I really think that those guys that are still left over could remember that, and that could be another motivating factor for them to really want to turn up and play well in this game. The only concern I really have is it is coming off the bye week, and whether or not you can keep that hunger up that they had after 3 weeks. They looked great. I'm just worried that maybe the bye week might have killed some of that momentum. But if they used it correctly and used it really as sort of a breather and a way to sort of catch their breath after a great start, then they should be able to pick right up where they left off against this team, because this team can be beaten and they are susceptible, especially on their defense. So it's for that reason I am going to pick the Eagles to win this game. My prediction is Eagles 28, Lions 17. After the game, I'll go ahead and check in and let you know what I thought of the game, and hopefully we'll be celebrating another Eagles win. Until I check in again, fly Eagles fly.